I am reading Pride and Prejudice for the first time in my life, and I'm only a few chapters in, but I want to talk about how I think Austen is a genius for what I probably call as character information. What I mean by this is that most of the things that we know don't come from a narrator's perspective about the characters, but they come from other characters' perspectives of that characters, which reinforces the idea of prejudice. I want to show a few examples of this, but the brilliant thing about all this, again, is I think Austen is doing this so that everything just kind of feels like gossip in the books. And you can either believe the character assessment of the people in the story and kind of fall prey to the gossip. You can either attempt to kind of form your own opinions of the characters based on the small amount of time that we have with that we actually have with the characters, or you can kind of just be like Jane and assume the best in every single character, no matter what different characters say. But I just think it's a brilliant implement from Austen to show the importance of not only the characters having prejudice, but we as the audience and the readers having prejudice. It's a really interesting thing. Again, I'm going to talk about this later, but I don't see a lot of authors doing this. She doesn't just do this uniformly in her writing, as there are narrator descriptions, but there are descriptions given to characters that come from the omniscient narrator's perspective. But even some of the narrator beats come after we just had a lengthy amount of time with a single character, and the narrator beats feel like they are skewing the narration in line with the character that we just spent time with. There's a moment that happens with Lizzie, I think in chapter 3 or 4, where the narrator comes out and describes something, but it's very much in Lizzie's voice. And I think this is a brilliant implement, but the first blank slate narration that we get, where it doesn't seem like there's a bias, is Mr. and Mrs. Bennett. The book says this: Mr. Bennett was so odd a mixture of quick parts, sarcastic humor, reserve, and caprice that the experience of 23 years had been insufficient to make his wife understand his character. Her mind was less difficult to develop. She was a woman of mean understanding, little information, and uncertain temper. When she was discontented, she fancied herself nervous. The business of her life was to get her daughters married. Its solace was visiting and news. Now, this really is the only time that I find the narrator is kind of coming out of the text and giving us a more unbiased opinion and the unbiased descriptors of a character. The rest of the descriptions that we get of different characters come from what other characters say about different characters and about what they think about them. Let me give you a few examples, again, because I think this is genius. I'm only in the first 4 chapters, so I'm only going to give you examples up to that point. But in the first chapter, we know that Bingley is rich because of the gossip of Mrs. Bennet. When she says, "Why, my dear, you must know, Mrs. Long says that Netherfield is taken by a young man of a large fortune from the north of England, that he came down on Monday in a chaise and 4 to see the place, and was so much delighted with it that he agreed with Mr. Morris immediately." And so we know that he's rich based on what the gossip says. And we also know that Lily possesses more quickness by the words of her father, who thinks higher of her than the other daughters. So immediately we think Lizzie is smarter than her sisters, which, let's be honest, she is. But the novel would take a huge turn if we realize really quickly that she wasn't really quicker than her sisters. And we'd have to deal with the prejudice of a certain character, and we wouldn't trust Mr. Bennett anymore. And we wouldn't trust how they viewed someone. But this happens all over the place in the novels in the first few chapters, and I think that's a game that we have to play as the audience to see who we trust and who we don't. I mean, it's literally called Pride and Prejudice, so of course it's going to happen a lot, but it happens in the 3rd chapter all over the place. We get this line immediately for this chapter. Sir William had been delighted with him. He was quite young, wonderfully handsome, extremely agreeable, and to crown the whole, he meant to be at the next assembly with a large party. So we don't know if Bingley really is handsome and really is agreeable, but we do know, and we do find that out to be true later, but the description comes from another person. Again, this is reinforcing the idea that everything that we know about the characters comes from gossip, which is again, I'm going to keep saying this, it's a brilliant way to write a novel about prejudice. Even when Bingley calls on Bennett, the book says that he had heard much about the beauty of the daughters. So she is, again, establishing the characters based off gossip. This generally works as most of the characters do stay true to the gossip. But it starts to go off the rails for Mr. Darcy, which I guess this is the whole Pride and Prejudice thing. The first real note that we have of him in the books is that he is handsomer than Bingley. But he is found not to be agreeable, so no one cares how handsome he is, because, as the book says, his character was decided. He was the proudest, most disagreeable man in the world. Poor Darcy. And this makes the 4th chapter so interesting too, because there is one character, and this is the first time we get in this novel a character who we meet who really isn't affected by the gossip, because she is just presumed to be young and innocent and naive. Even though she is the eldest daughter of the Bennets, Jane is the beacon of looking at people with a positive eye. Look at the conversation that happens between her and Lizzie and see how Jane's opinion is kind of discounted because she's just said to be naive and she's just said to think the best of people, which is ironically exactly what is needed in this story to avoid all the drama. This is what the book says. Oh, you are a great deal too apt, to like people in general. You never see a fault in anybody. All the world are good and agreeable in your eyes. I never heard you speak ill of a human being in my life. I would wish not to be hasty in censuring anyone, but I always speak what I think. I know you do, and it is that which makes the wonder. With your good sense to be so honestly blind to the follies and nonsense of others. Affectation of candor is common enough, one meets it everywhere, but to be candid without ostentation or designed to take the good of everybody's character and make it still better and say nothing of the bad belongs to you alone. But again, this is exactly what Lizzie needs. She needs to be able to see the best in someone, even though she has a prejudice against that person. So I just wanted to come in here real quick and say that I think Austen is genius for this kind of writing. I don't think that I see it too often. I think a lot of other authors that I read don't necessarily trust their audiences to figure out what's going on in the story, but I think Austen really trusts us. And I think in this section, she makes the first few chapters so gossipy that it makes us base our own opinions of the characters on false assumptions that we have of what's going on with the gossip, which again is a great way to start a relationship, or it's not a great way to start a relationship with a person, but it seems like it's a whole purpose of the novel. It's all about pride and prejudice. And I think that this is a genius thing for Jane Austen to do. And again, I don't encounter this that often in writing, but I think she is so brilliant for letting us think as the audience and wade through both her humor and her snark and just how much gossip is actually in this novel. But that's all I got for you today. I just wanted to come in here real quick and talk about how brilliant I think she is and how I'm excited to read the rest of the novel. So if you made it this far in the video, you can subscribe because I am just kind of reading Pride and Prejudice. We're going to read some of the classics on this channel. And yeah, I'm going to read Pride and Prejudice this month. I do some live reads of it. And you can like the video too if you want more of this kind of content. And I'll see you in the next one.